I'm really glad Oregon's not like Indiana, and thoughts on Davon Benjamin on today's show.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. I'll talk about every guy that will be in media, or he is here at Media Days, and will be taking the stage later today as this show airs, because there are three of them, and they're pretty important pieces. No need to wonder why they came down here with Dan Lanning, and maybe, just maybe, there's a distinct, slight, minor possibility that I'll talk about on today's show. I overlooked the possibility of going 12-0. I'll talk about it on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So, live as podcasts are, of course, from Radio Row here at Las Vegas. Curt Cignetti earlier today, Indiana's head coach, who Oregon will play this year in Vegas, has got plenty of confidence. Our friends at FanDuel have Oregon favored by 14.5 over the Hoosiers this year. That's not what I wanted to talk about, though. I'm glad that Oregon is not like Indiana, because Curt Cignetti, answering a question that I actually asked him, because I think it's terrible what they did, and I talked about it last week over on Locked On College Football. They canceled a future home-and-home series with Virginia to replace it with really, really easy games. I'm really happy this is not what Oregon's doing. They've got an Oklahoma State home-and-home. Do I think college football scheduling is ridiculous? Yes, 100%. But they've got an Oklahoma State home-and-home this year and next year, and then 2027 and 28, it's a Baylor home-and-home, where they'll come to Eugene and Oregon will go to Waco. I really appreciate the fact that the Oregon coaching staff and administration is keeping those games. I have not heard anything at all with regards to getting out of those games. Now, on the scheduling front, I do hope they get a future series scheduled again with Oregon State, because currently that matchup is going to happen this year and is not slated to happen again after the season. Rob Mullins, the athletic director for Oregon, said that they'd like to keep that matchup going. I hope they do. Not sure if that will happen. But Indiana taking the route, the path of least resistance, is not a path I would ever want to see Oregon go down, for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, it's not as much fun to watch. Can you imagine if Oregon's non-conference slate this year? I think everybody should have one FCS, one Group of 5, one Power 4 opponent. Imagine if Oregon's first three games that are at Autzen Stadium this year were Montana State, Northern Arizona, and then Oregon State. Would that excite you as much as a fan? Like, even though Oklahoma State is coming off a year where they really struggled last season, that's not a game I'm thinking Oregon is able to just completely overlook. Mike Gundy's a really good coach. He might not have a great team this year, but he does have a proven track record of winning football games for a long time. So I don't think that the fan experience is as good. I don't like that Cignetti's doing that for Indiana fans, and I hope that Oregon will never go in that particular direction. And the second reason, and this goes back to something I've talked about a lot recently on the show, the playoff expansion and the format and how that's all going to potentially shake out. When you don't know how it's all going to go, the idea of having a quality non-conference win on there is never a bad thing. Now, the other side of the coin is, of course, you're more likely to lose a game to Oklahoma State or Baylor than you are to an FCS opponent or a low-level Group of 5 that you could pay to come into Autzen Stadium and get their teeth kicked in. But I think that for the Ducks, you shouldn't try to be making a program, as Dan Lanning says, where you're trying to gimmick your way into the playoff. Like, is that everywhere you'd want to be? I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts, so let me know in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter and all of that good stuff. But I want to have the ability to put a quality non-conference win on the resume, and I just don't want to watch as many of those games. I understand the importance of bye games, and I do like, I definitely prefer Oregon starting with, somewhat of a tune-up game this year with Montana State. Last year was supposed to be Idaho, to just kind of work the kinks out, especially for a season like this year where they have so many new pieces, including but not limited to their likely quarterback, Dante Moore. But I just hope that Oregon never goes down that particular path. So that was my first thought I wanted to share on today's show that was buzzing here at Media Days. Second thought, Davon Benjamin is committing on August 2nd. So we're about 10-ish days away from the time this show airs, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that sort of range. He's committing sometime next week. He's down to Oregon and 4 other schools. And he'd represent the first actual corner commit for Oregon in the class of 2026. And do I want Oregon to get him? Yes. He's seen as one of the more versatile defensive back recruits on the West Coast and can play a number of different positions. I think having one or two of those guys in a class, Xavier Larice, the safety commit, might also be able to play some nickel. He's got a little bit more of that body type, whereas the other safeties that Oregon has, like Jet Washington, are taller, longer, rangier sorts of types on the back end. But at the same time, when I watch Xavier Larice's film, I see a lot of John Boyette. I think that's kind of the high-end potential there, and I'm long time a big fan of John Boyette. But the interesting thing about Davon Benjamin for Oregon is that their defensive back recruiting, I think, is going to cool off from where it has been in the last couple of cycles, at least in terms of volume, because what I've heard is that Oregon is investing, as they should, a lot of their NIL attention, yes, into the portal, but also into player retention. And, Dan Lanning has cited before, I wonder if we'll hear about it again at Media Days this week, that they've never lost a starter to the transfer portal. I think that has a lot of really good indicators about where the program's at and how Dan Lanning's running it and the culture and all that sort of stuff. But I think that if Oregon has, these 2 classes that are so stacked and they're not going to use up, like, most of those guys, I think are redshirting or will have the ability to redshirt either this year or next year, Oregon's 2026 defensive back haul could be pretty light. And I liken it to the defensive line, where in the 23 and 24 classes, you saw Oregon really, really load up at those 2 position groups. And then in the last cycle, it was not non-existent, but it was definitely lighter. It wasn't an emphasis. And, I think defensively, you saw in that 2023 class where they had 10 defensive line commits and more than half of them are still on Oregon's roster. You saw an emphasis from Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy to build the defense from the inside out. And now I think they feel like they haven't added really defensive line transfers aside from Bear Alexander over the last couple of cycles. Like, most of the defensive line has been guys they recruited from that class. I think in the coming years, you're going to see fewer and fewer, or maybe just a high-profile one like Dylan Thieneman here or there, defensive back transfers as well, whereas you've seen quite a few over the last couple of years because of the way they're cycling through and stacking these classes. So I definitely would like to see Oregon get Benjamin to, get a little bit of recruiting momentum back so they could surge inside the top 10. They're outside of that ranking right now. But positionally, I think it's interesting because you're seeing these same sorts of trends start to emerge, and I think the lack of volume that you're going to see from the cornerback position is reflective of how they've recruited it in the last couple of cycles, how they feel not just about that talent, but their ability to hold on to that talent and keep them out of the transfer portal. So let me know your thoughts on all that in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. There are 3 Oregon players down here at Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas this week, and I have thoughts on all of them because they are all here for a very specific reason. First, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute you want to head to a ball game with friends and family? Maybe it's game day, and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, even invite a bigger group to go with you. Game Time makes it all possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. They've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. I've used Game Time myself, and the process is great. Tickets get delivered right to your phone. You get a great deal. They've got the all-in pricing feature, so you don't get surprise fees at checkout. You know what to expect. The process was great. Highly recommend. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so a couple of thoughts on the guys that are going to be down here who I'm hoping to get at least a little bit of audio from all three of these guys this week and bring it to you here on the show. Bryce Boettcher, Matayo Uiagalelei, and Kenyon Sadiq. I'm not surprised that any of them are the guys that Dan Lanning has chosen to bring down and represent Oregon at Media Days this year. But because these are guys that are not just veterans of the roster, but I mean, you could argue are among Oregon's three most important players who are not Dante Moore at quarterback. And of course, we knew Dan Lanning wasn't going to bring a quarterback, right? Is he going to name a starting quarterback this week? Nope, definitely not expecting that. So I want to start with Bryce Boettcher. Having Bryce back is really, really great and huge, I think, for this defense for two reasons. Number one, highest graded returning linebacker, I believe, per Pro Football Focus in the Big Ten. We know the talent is there, and obviously he understands the system very well, having been there for the last couple of years. But number two, if you didn't have Bryce Boettcher at linebacker for Oregon this year, who would you highlight as the undisputed leader of the defense? Would there be, Matayo, perhaps. I'll get to him in just a moment. But I think having Boettcher there, when you lost Jeffrey Bassa, who for the last 2 years was really the guy that everyone kind of looked to and was the signal caller as well. He's the one who's wearing the helmet that has the communication with the coaching staff to get the plays and get everybody in order. Like, when you lose a guy like that, there aren't that you can have plenty of talented players on your team. Amari Washington or Bear Alexander are talented players on the team, or Ify Obadeg was a really talented player. But you got to have that veteran leadership presence, and I think that's what I'm most excited about, to have Bryce on the defense. It probably would have fallen to Devin Jackson, who I really, really like, and he didn't play in spring ball. I think he's going to be fine by the time the season actually gets going. Those two, as a linebacker tandem, the experience, the productivity, and the leadership they can provide, particularly with Bryce, though, I think is just really, really big for this Oregon defense, because I don't really know where it would go. And someone would have to, I think, really step into a role that maybe you wouldn't expect him to if Bryce hadn't come back. So I'm most interested to ask him this week, what he sees as his sports future. Of course, he was drafted into Major League Baseball with the Houston Astros. I hope he never plays with the Astros. But he was drafted there. He could absolutely have a future in baseball. If he has another great season, is it out of the realm of possibility he'd get drafted in the NFL? I don't think so. No. Does he have, early round linebacker traits in the NFL world? Probably not. But do I think he could get taken? If you have two seasons as productive as what he did last year as Oregon's leading tackler, and if he does that again this year, man, kind of feels like it'd be hard to ignore. And so I'm interested to ask him that, but if you have a question you want me to ask Bryce, let me know. I'll see if I can make that happen. And then we go to Matayo, and I'm so unbelievably excited to watch Matayo Uiagalelei this year. I hyped him up a pretty good amount last year, lived up to the billing, led the Big Ten in sacks in the regular season with 10.5. And, he's the guy who I think going into this year, I trust most along the defensive line. Not that there aren't other guys I like. Tatum Tuiotti's good. I haven't seen Tatum Tuioti showcase the game-wrecking ability that Matayo has shown over the last couple of years. And I think Tatum, just to be clear, is one of the starters for this Oregon front four. I think you'll have Tatum Tuioti, Bear Alexander, Amari Washington, and Matayo Uiagalelei. But Matayo's going to have all the hype. Matayo's going to have all the attention. That's certainly not going to get tamped down with him coming here to Media Days as one of the Oregon player representatives. And, I think I know what his NFL future is going to look like, presuming he stays healthy this entire year, which is at the same time unfortunate, but also really exciting. Unfortunate because this is probably the last year Oregon gets of Matayo, but exciting because he should have just a phenomenally awesome season. And I do think that Oregon's defensive line depth is such that, it doesn't feel like Kayvon Thibodeau in 2021 or 2019, and I don't really count 2020 because what even was that football season? Even though Oregon won the Pac-10, Pac-12 championship, it was just weird. But those two seasons with Kayvon Thibodeau, if you look at the quality of defensive line depth that was around him, there was a pretty sizable gap. Now, Matayo is the best defensive lineman that Oregon has, but there isn't that same gap. And so if Matayo commands a bunch of attention and double teams, I don't think you're going to see a situation like, in 2021 when Oregon played Ohio State at the Horseshoe and, of course, won the game without Kayvon Thibodeau. C.J. Stroud went for over 400 yards passing because there was no pressure. And Kayvon Thibodeau would have been able to create more pressures because eventually you get one-on-one situations, and he was just too good and was going to win those spots at a pretty high clip. But there wasn't another NFL caliber defensive lineman on that front four, or at least that felt ready at that time. So, because I think Brandon Dorlus was there, but Dorlus wasn't as good as he maybe was in the 22 and 23 seasons. So I think that for Matayo, he's in such a great spot because the staff has done a great job surrounding him with the depth that they have over the last couple of recruiting cycles, and they've retained most of that talent as well. I'm really excited to see, on the interior, if a guy like Aiden Breland or Terrence Green has a big role this year. I think Breland could be an absolute monster as well. But, I'm excited to watch Matayo because I think he's going to be the best edge rusher that Oregon has had since Kayvon Thibodeau. I think this season, I think he already is that sort of talent. But, I never place a Thibodeau-level expectation on anybody. He's about as close to that as you can get without, putting him right there in that particular camp. So definitely excited to talk to him, especially about the other guys in the defensive line room, kind of try to get an idea of who's stood out to him so far with fall camp right around the corner. And then Kenyon Sadiq is offensively, I think he and DeCorian Moore are the guys I'm most excited to watch. Not that I'm not stoked to watch Dante, of course, but he's going to throw the ball to somebody. Feels like Sadiq is going to be that guy in just a big, big way this year. And the opportunity for him to get the lion's share of targets, Oregon's used multiple tight end sets a lot since Dan Lanning arrived. I think that will continue. That's why they brought in Jamari Johnson from Louisville. I think he's pretty clearly going to be the number 2 tight end. But, in passing situations the last couple of years, it was mostly T. Ferg at the tight end spot. But Sadiq had some moments, especially last season, with the ways that they can get him involved on things like tunnel screens, which is not normal tight end behavior. Fly sweeps, again, not normal tight end behavior. But, Patrick Herbert also got involved from time to time. I think it's going to be a lot of Kenyon Sadiq, and I'm totally here for it. Now, a question someone asked me a while back was, could Kenyon Sadiq lead Oregon in receiving yards this year? My instinct is no, because he plays tight end. But is he really a tight end? Dude's just a football player and a heck of an athlete out there. There are a lot of receiving options, so the threshold to be Oregon's leading receiver this year maybe isn't going to be as high as it would have been the last couple of seasons. Tez Johnson had around 900 yards and he got hurt, or he would have had another 1,000-yard season. Troy Franklin was over 1,000 yards the year before, as was Tez. I don't know if Sadiq gets there at the tight end position. I do think he's about to have a career season, and he and DeCorian Moore are just such unique players at their positions. And I talked about DeCorian yesterday on the show. Those two guys, amongst a really good array of talented weapons for Dante Moore to throw the football to, those two guys I think should be the skill position players that excite us the most, because the potential for high-end playmaking is just immense, and they're just they're in a position where they're going to have such a big opportunity to thrive. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, or if they exist anywhere, but last year I'd say Terrence Ferguson probably had around 60 to 70% of all the passing targets that went to tight ends. I bet Kenyon Sadiq can push that into the 80 to 90 range. And a tight end catch, like you go back to the spring game and he caught a ball. I think it was from Brock Moore, actually. I'd have to go back and look at it. But he had like a 30 to 40 yard catch way down the field. And you just looked it up and went, oh, it was a tight end. Right. That's not normal tight end behavior, but the highlight reels that he made in the Big Ten championship game, I think we're going to see a lot of that, and I'm beyond excited to watch him and to talk to him this week. Hopefully I get the chance to do that and just talk to him about kind of what he learned from Terrence Ferguson the last couple of years, and also what he expects from himself in the offense, and maybe get some insight into the quarterback room as well. So excited to talk to those guys. If you have questions you want to ask or answered, I'll do my best this week. Best to shoot me a DM on Twitter. YouTube comments can get hard to track sometimes. So if you want something, Twitter, Instagram, hit me up, and we'll see what we can do. So, ongoing discussion here on Locked On Ducks. The possibility of Oregon going 12-0. Maybe I overlooked it a bit. So Oregon's schedule works out really favorably this year. They're an underdog against Penn State. They will be favored in every other game that they play. The Washington line, for those who didn't know, according to our friends at FanDuel, believe Oregon minus 12.5, despite that game being in Seattle. That is a lot of points for a rivalry game on the road. I also thought 17.5 was a lot for a rivalry game last year, and it was close at the half, kinda, and then Oregon drubbed them in the second, of course, 49-21. It is Oregon minus 12.5 in Seattle this year. So, last week I talked about best case and worst case scenario for the Ducks this year. I'll admit I maybe didn't give quite enough credit to Oregon winning the Penn State game. It is only a 4.5-point line, which, of course, Vegas is trying to get the money on either side, but they do set those lines with an idea of where they feel those teams should be going into the season. Now, that's preseason expectation. Results can change when you get on the field. If everything went absolutely, positively perfect, sure, I suppose Oregon could go 12-0. The reason I went to 11-1 is it almost feels like there are too many things that would have to go right. But then you come back to the schedule and it just works out. Oklahoma State is not what they've been in the past, and Oregon has them at home. All their non-conference games are at home. The early game against Northwestern, and to win that Penn State game, that's really what it came down to for me. Is I've been adamant all offseason. Yeah, I can't see Oregon. I don't think Oregon's going to win that Penn State game. Is it out of the realm of possibility? Completely impossible? No, it is not. So okay. Point taken. Yeah, I guess best case scenario would be 12-0 if everything really, really went right. But look at what it took last year for Oregon to go 12-0 with, mind you, the most experienced quarterback in the history of college football. The Ohio State game was crazy. You needed a piece of coaching genius from Dan Lanning that was so awesome. The NCAA changed the rules that week so that if you take a 12-man on the field penalty, the clock gets reset to where it was before the play. And again, Ohio State got breaks in that game as well. No doubt about it. Oregon missed a PAT, the interception debacle. That was definitely a coin flip game. I think we can agree on that. But you also have to remember, Oregon went to a game where they were a road double-digit favorite at Wisconsin late in the season. And this year's Dante Moore or last year's Dante Moore, I don't think wins that game. I think you needed to have a guy like Dylan Gabriel or Bo Nix, who had been in that spot several times before for several years of college football, to figure out how to win when you don't have Tez Johnson, when you make a mistake early on, and you just are in a tough environment. You're playing your 8th straight game. That game took a lot. So all of that to go 12-0 that's a lot of things going right. They did go right. And analytically, I think numbers would tell you you're probably not going to get all of those breaks if you play a couple of games that are decided by a field goal or less. So situationally, Oregon has to be very good. Now, that's been one of the biggest areas of growth for Dan Lanning and his staff over the last several years. You look at the first couple of seasons compared to last year, situational football improved dramatically. That's a credit to the coaching staff in my view. So after thinking about it a little, I'll concede the point that if everything went perfectly, yeah, the Ducks would go 12-0. It's just not – there's so many things would have to go right. I think that is asking a lot. But when you're going to be favored in 11 games and the one game you're an underdog is a 4.5 point, you got a lot of things working against you in that Penn State game. But I'm just getting more excited day by day. We are a month and a week, so 5 weeks or so of time to the first Oregon football game of the year. Can't wait. Can't wait to see a number of things. So let's close with our trivia of the day, following up on yesterday's questions here on the show. How many coaches have won the AP Coach of the Year? I said 2. It's just 1. Chip Kelly in 2010. I was right on the number, wrong on the players, though, for how many have won the Polynesian College Football Player of the Year. Penei Sewell shared the award in 2019, and Marcus Mariota won it in 2014. So the question was not who, it was how many. So I think I go 1 for 2 there. Feel solid about that, which brings us to today's trivia questions. What is the winning percentage of the coach with the most wins at Oregon? Rich Brooks was there for so long. I have to, but Bellotti won a lot more game. I'm gonna say 48% actually, because Rich Brooks was there for a very, very long time. And the early days, it was not particularly easy. So I'll go 48%. Which Oregon team moved to number 1 in the AP and USA Today coaches poll for the first time? 2010 under Chip Kelly against Washington, all black uniforms at home. I remember that specifically. I am 99% confident that's correct. And this one as well. What piece of evidence won the lawsuit for Oregon over Disney's legal challenges on the rights to use the duck? What piece of evidence? I do not. Piece of evidence. I don't even know what the piece of evidence would be. I'm gonna go right to use the duck. Oh gosh, you stumped me with that one. That was a good trivia. I can't even come up with an answer. I'll say the bill of the duck. I have got absolutely no idea. I'm loving the trivia questions. Hope you guys are as well. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.